Good evening. Welcome to this edition of the 411 Talk Zone radio show. My name is Leon Jones. This evening's topic: urban decay, cities, infrastructure, social, and political policies. Urban decay, cities, infrastructure, social, and political policies. Now, I want to bring this topic to the forefront because a number of us who live in the United States of America have been to a major or urban area in this country. And no matter where you go, you see the same issue. Blighted buildings, which blighted means dilapidated, buildings that are structurally unsafe to occupy, and you see a lot of poverty. But why is all this happening? Well, the obvious, everybody's going to look at the poverty issue, but you must first look at the infrastructure. Before you can demolish the old buildings and put up new infrastructure, you must look at the types of systems that were used in the previous erection of infrastructure. Now, some of this infrastructure in these urban areas was built in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Now, you have to look at the age of the infrastructure. Is there a lot of rust in the infrastructure? Because if pipes get rusty, well, that rust can get in your water line and cause a problem. And if you look at some of the soil, is it contaminated? Because you have some old abandoned gas stations that still have USTs, which stands for underground storage tanks, that could be toxic. And see, when a number of these buildings were erected in the late 19th and the 20th centuries, well, there was no EPA. The EPA didn't come about until 1970, so you didn't have any environmental standards. So a number of these older buildings, I guarantee you, they got rat feces. The insulation was filled with asbestos. You also had lead paint in a number of these buildings. Now, I will tell you, some of these buildings that I've seen were built with brick and stone. Brick and stone can withstand just about anything. But what you do see are a lot of roofs that have collapsed. Now, when you erect a structure, you must understand that you have to take dead loads and live loads into effect. Now, over the years, some of these buildings have withstood a lot of bad weather. Rain, snow, tornadoes, and some of these buildings have been torn down and rebuilt, or they've been added on to. And each time when you tinker with a building, you make it weaker. You also have to look at what type of heating systems and electrical systems that went into making a number of these buildings work when it comes to utilizing utilities. See, times have changed. A lot of your infrastructure today is more modern, like the heating systems are more automated, more energy efficient. Back in those days, you used a lot of steam, and steam came from water. It also came from coal. And when it comes to a number of these buildings as well, you have to really be engaged on what really caused these buildings to be in this shape. Why didn't anybody put any money into them? This is where the politics is going to come in. Because you had a number of people who just left these areas. Now, I believe they left these areas because of a lack of industry. I'll give you a city as an example, Gary, Indiana. Now, I do a lot of work in Gary. And when my mom lived in Gary in the 1950s, it was booming. I mean, you had 40,000 people who were working at the steel mill. And Gary had close to 200,000 people. It was the second largest city here in the Rust Belt. I live in Indiana myself. I live in Portage. The steel mills are still running, but now only 7,000 people are working in steel mills. Now, when you go into cities like Gary, you do see a lot of poverty and dilapidated buildings, but you also have to look at, too, when I talk about buildings, a number of these buildings stand in flood zones. And flooding can do a lot of damage to buildings. It could overflow your storm drains. It could also bring a lot of bacteria, which is very toxic, and it can get into your stormwater system, and that's going to cause a problem. You have a lot of sewage. That also comes from some of these creeks. And when you mix sewer water and storm water together, you got toxic water. And back in the days when they were erecting infrastructure, they didn't have water filtration systems. In fact, a lot of your water was basically boiled. But when you look at infrastructure that is dilapidated, you have to look at the foundation. And if you were looking at what it takes to demolish and rebuild these buildings, now you have to go through the EPA standards. You have to have building permits. You have to have equipment, labor, and you have to build a building for a suitable purpose. And if you don't have any of that in order, there's no way you can rebuild the city. And in order to have a city, your infrastructure needs to be modernized. Today we live in technology, and your buildings must be LEED certified, which that means energy efficient. LEED means LEED has something to do with making your buildings very, very energy efficient. It stands for Leading Environmental Energy Design. That's what LEED stands for. But along with having your infrastructure in place, I got to turn it over to the social aspects, because there are a number of people who lived in these urban areas who didn't own their infrastructure. And so when you don't own something, what generally happens is you don't really care about where you live. You're only there for the purpose of surviving. And what happens is you have the government who's basically subsidizing some of these individuals to maintain their lifestyle. And it creates a cycle of poverty which will not allow people who live in this type of environment to escape. It's more like a concentration camp. And you talk about slavery. Well, you are living in psychological slavery because you're basically a slave to the government, because when you are being subsidized with this housing, with food stamps, with cash, then you become a slave to the government. One wrong move and you're off the program. And also, this cycle of poverty that comes from the system, it basically allows individuals to be reckless with sex. That's men and women. And when that happens, well, this is where the dysfunction starts, because you don't have individuals getting married. You don't have individuals who are interested in working. There are no businesses in that neck of the woods. And what you have is an environment that's filled with drugs, alcohol, and violence. And when it comes to the social aspects, these types of areas have bad public school systems because the teachers are bad. Now you have a lot of churches. But the problem with these churches is these churches have become the monuments of failure. They do not help the community. In fact, the individual known as the pastor who comes into this community basically sits in front of a bunch of women in the congregation and takes their money. And once he gets the money, he takes it back out to the suburbs to where he lives. And he comes back the next Sunday and he preaches from the Bible. But what he's not preaching is the dysfunction that's going on in this neighborhood. He's not telling a number of these women and men out there what you're doing is wrong. You're causing your own demise in your own city when you don't have intact families. But see, the pastor doesn't care about that. And too many people give this pastor a pass because he's a pastor. But a lot of these pastors out here are crooks. They preach to scriptures that they want to preach from, or they interpret the scripture the way they want to interpret it. And what they do, they get their congregation in an emotional high, so they say that they're dancing, singing in the name of the Lord. Well, you don't need to do all that to dance and sing in the name of the Lord. What you need from this pastor is teachings about family, about right and wrong, about a moral compass. But a number of these preachers, again, don't care. A number of these preachers who come in to these communities, they seek an opportunity. And if you look at these communities, what do you have? Well, again, boarded up houses. You have some bull crap, tax places, check cashing places. You have chicken places that are greasy. You have some Dollar General stores or Family Dollar stores. I'm not talking about the name Dollar General or Family Dollar. I'm just talking about dollar stores. And they could be called some name like the 99-cent store. But all of the products are very cheap. And the people who are running these little stores don't even look like you. But they take that money from your community into their community and build their community while they leave you high and dry. The problem with that is when it comes to individuals who live in the urban areas, they have no concept of money because they never had any money. Again, when you're reckless with sex and you have a cycle of poverty, you have a cycle of felonies or incarceration, a cycle of violence, a cycle where there are no families intact, this is what you get, the dysfunction. And because individuals don't see good role models, they continue this dysfunctional behavior. And then what they do, they get on social media and you can see this dysfunctional behavior. And the problem with that dysfunctional behavior that is being exhibited on social media is people who have never come into contact with so many urbanized individuals. Take people like myself and other individuals who don't live in that environment and categorize us as those types of people. The problem is social media allows this dysfunction. And where is this dysfunction taking place? It's taking place in the urbanized areas. Again, a number of these individuals really don't care about where they live, so they're not going to take care of their communities. They're not even going to take care of each other. All they're going to do is commit violence against each other. And what's happening, more and more and more and more of them are being bred, but you have a number of them who are also being aborted. The bottom line, when you don't have any morals, in your community, you have this dysfunction. And this is what these pastors need to be teaching some of these individuals who live in these communities. When you don't have any right or wrong, you have a libertine society. And a libertine society is dangerous. And this is why these urban communities have fallen on deaf ears and nobody wants to fix them up. But now if people do come in and fix them up, what's going to happen? Well, they're going to demolish all the old infrastructure and put up new infrastructure, and they're going to raise the rent. So where do you take the people who have been lounging around in these types of neighborhoods? Well, you're going to probably put them in other areas. And what's going to happen? They're going to bring that same mindset in the new areas that you place them. They're going to become run down and dilapidated because these individuals who live in some of these urban areas don't have any concept of what it is to build and maintain a community. People who take pride in their community keep their communities clean. You don't have to have a lot of money. You have a number of communities, and I'm not specifying race because I've been in the mountains of Kentucky and I've seen the same thing. I've been to Kansas and I've seen the same thing. So it's across racial lines. When you are on the system and you continue to be on the system, you're not encouraged to get off the system. You're encouraged to stay on a system. Now, why is that? Well, the system keeps you dependent on government. So you become a slave to the government. But also, when it comes to the policy aspects, there's one party who believes in a welfare state, and that's the Democratic Party. And what the Democrats do, they constantly, in every election, put out what kind of free programs that these individuals are going to get. Now, of course, these individuals are going to vote for them, but they never become rich because they have no concept, again, of what investing is or what business is. The only concept that they have is just existing. That is it. And they bear children for the sake of a paycheck. They don't love these children. They just have the children. And the men, of course, are very reckless themselves because they don't care anything about these women. They just want to get a nut. But when you put all those issues together, then you have the dysfunction. This is where the violence, this is where all the criminals come from, this is where all the felonies come from, this is where you have a lack of education, and also when there's no industry. That causes a lot of dysfunction in some of these neighborhoods as well, because when you have jobs, for the most part, people are reluctant to go to work. But when the jobs have moved out of some of these urban areas, well, these areas began to decay and the well-off residents moved out, just leaving the poor to suffer. And what happens in a poor community? Nothing gets built and your infrastructure starts to deteriorate. Now, my third point is the politics. Well, the politicians who are running these cities are Democratic. And basically, today's Democratic Party believes in abortion. They believe in open borders. They believe in government-run schools. They believe in the welfare state. They believe in gay marriage. But what they don't believe in is family, good jobs for the most part. They don't believe in men building, fathers in their homes, who are basically teaching their children how to become model citizens so they can get out in the real world and provide for their own children. These Democrats, they vote for high taxes. And when you have all these issues in place, and of course, don't forget financial aid for colleges, you have debt. And when you have debt, you're enslaved to that debt. If you have a credit card that you maxed out, it's going to take you a long time to pay that debt off. Well, a number of these individuals who live in these neighborhoods, they're poor spenders. They buy tangible items, which may last them maybe up to 3 months. They'll go to places like Aaron's Rents Furniture or Rent to Own. They'll get some furniture that would most likely in any other store, I'm going to just throw this number out here, be $700. Well, they're going to end up paying every 2 weeks for this furniture. And when the furniture is paid off, they're going to pay 3 times more for the furniture than I would pay for the furniture. Again, these individuals have no concept of money, and you have a number of white liberal policies who keep these individuals enslaved in the urban areas. Why? Because they're a voting bloc. And if you constantly tell them that the government is on your side, they're going to believe it. And when you try to get off of that slave plantation, then you're going to be ostracized. And I call a number of these urban areas. Now, notice I didn't say the hood, I said urban areas. Because, again, a number of these urban areas, you're going to see the same thing. Again, you're going to see the violence. You're going to see the high out of wedlock pregnancies. You're going to see bad schools. You're going to see no jobs. You're going to see check cashing places. You're going to see liquor stores. You're going to see a lot of churches. You're going to hear a lot of music blasting. You're not going to have any family. And, of course, you're going to have a lot of violence. And again, socially and politically, this is going to continue to take place. Why? Because a number of your politicians really don't care about the cities. They're in power. They're very corrupted in their minds. And they want to do everything to screw over their citizens. And they do a good job of it. So when it comes to rebuilding a number of these cities, here's what you have to do. First of all, you have to get people in power who want to rebuild these cities. Number 2, you have to understand that when you rebuild these cities, you now have to worry about the environmental impacts, wetlands, flood zones. You have to upgrade all of the sewer systems. You're going to have to tear down all the blighted buildings, and you're going to have to see if any of the soil out there has been contaminated. Because fecal matter, you may have had a gas station, you may have had oil that was poured on this soil, which is definitely going to be damaging to the soil, because you don't want to get that soil around any human being because it's toxic. You have to understand about asbestos because you had lead paint. You also had insulation. And then to rebuild, you have to have building permits. And then also, you have to have individuals that are going to come in with the mindset that they're going to take care of their community once the community is built. And you have to have a number of individuals who understand urban planning. Now, what you have to do is start with a small population and then build out. So that means all the land that had these dilapidated buildings, you have to tear it down and you have to zone it for commercial or residential or industrial, because you're going to need jobs in order to bring taxpayers so they can fund some of these projects. But the bottom line, what are you going to do with the people who are already there? Now, you have some people who are older people who have weathered the storm. You can keep some of the decent communities intact, but the areas that are not functional, you have to demolish them. The bottom line is, when it comes to building a community, you also have to build a community that's going to have the implications that the citizens want to own their property. Because I believe if you own something, you're going to take better care of it rather than somebody handing you something, knowing it's not yours, you're just going to let it go. But at the end of the day, when it comes to the effects that deal with infrastructure / economics, social, and politics, that equals systematic racism and classism. And that's really what's going on in your urban areas. And I believe all this is designed to try to decrease the population. Now, why do they want the population decreased? Well, I know Margaret Sanger, she wanted a lot of population decreased because she believed that individuals in the urban areas, they were going to be a problem. These people weren't going to contribute to society. And I hate to say it, she was right. Now, I don't believe in her philosophies and eugenics, but at the end of the day, you have individuals who are living in these urban areas and they're doing nothing but existing. And at the end of the day, they're going to continue to breed dysfunctional people. And guess what? All these cities are going to continue to decay. Because, again, you need to have people who are going to occupy these urban areas who are interested in building a community and having something that they can call their own. Too many of us are slaves to working for somebody else. Now, of course, everybody can't be a business owner, but if we live in the urban areas, we can create our own goods and services. I mean, there are other races who do that, like Middle Easterns and Japanese and Asians. Now, of course, I'm not putting the black community on blast because there are, of course, white folk who do the same thing. But if you look at a lot of these urban areas, many of them are occupied by African American folks, and many of them are being run by African American folks who are Democrats. And the real coons are the ones who are running these cities. If somebody like a Kanye West or myself, we talk about slavery, talking about slavery of the mind. If we keep living like slaves, we're going to always be in the situation that we're in. Why? Because we don't understand what freedom really is. Because we're always looking for somebody to tell us what to do. But when that day comes and we become more of a free thinker instead of a monolithic thinker by staying on a plantation, only then we will be able to build communities so we can have our own infrastructure. Other than that, things are going to stay the same because the mindset with a number of individuals in the urban area is still on a plantation. If you don't believe me, look around you. And that's my commentary for this edition of the 411 Talk Zone radio show for this evening, Monday, May 14th, 2018. You can tune in to the 411 Talk Zone radio show every Saturday from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. on Blog Talk Radio. Guest calling number is 215-383-5785. If you like my videos, please share and subscribe to the 411 Talk Zone radio show right here on YouTube so I can continue to give you quality information for educational purposes from a professional and mature perspective. Now, on this channel, I don't engage in debates, controversial issues, or emotional issues. Now, that just depends on how individuals who are in the audience or who are listening to the video take this video. If it's emotional, you're probably the problem. If it's not, you're going to understand the content that's being presented. Also, I don't engage in drama and or unnecessary bickering because it is counterproductive. What I do on my channel is give you information that is researched, and of course, I put in my own personal opinion, especially when it comes to infrastructure, because I am a civil engineer and I see every day why these cities are crumbling, and the individuals need to pay attention because your city could be next. And when I deliver this information, it's realistic but positive, because you need to understand how the real world works. Without knowledge, you don't have any power. And if you have a topic, a new YouTube channel, or business that you would like for me to discuss on YouTube or Blog Talk Radio, please email me at lej6521@gmail.com. And if you have a comment, please leave your comment in the comment section under the video. But make sure that your comments are pithy. No bloviating, pettifogging, or filibustering. If you wish to opine. Now, that's it for this video. Till next time, my name is Leon Jones. Remember, please be gentle and respectful to each other, and have a wonderful and blessed evening. Good night.